I was 20 years old, bleeding through a fresh surgical scar, holding a screaming infant, when my husband dropped divorce papers on my hospital bed. He called us a burden, dragging down his luxurious lifestyle before walking out to board a flight to Paris with his mistress. Now, 15 years later, he just kicked down the door to our Thanksgiving dinner, slamming a check for $100,000 onto my plate and demanding to buy the very son he threw away. He had no idea the child he called a burden held the execution key to his corporate empire. My name is Rachel, 35 years old, and I learned the hard way that family is not about blood. It is about loyalty. Before I tell you how I turned a lifetime of humiliation into the ultimate revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against a family that completely underestimated your worth. The roasted turkey sat untouched on the mahogany dining table. My older sister Claire was lecturing me about my plain sweater, ignoring the fact that my son Leo and I were simply trying to eat in peace. Claire loved hosting Thanksgiving at her sprawling suburban estate because it gave her a captive audience. Her husband Jamal, a brilliant corporate lawyer, sat quietly at the head of the table, offering me a sympathetic smile whenever Claire made a biting remark about my modest apartment. I had spent 15 years building a quiet, unassuming life for Leo and myself, hiding the truth of my financial status to protect us from the very greed that poisoned my family. The heavy oak front door flew open with a violent crash that rattled the crystal wine glasses. The freezing November wind whipped into the dining room, followed immediately by the suffocating scent of expensive cologne and designer perfume. Bradley marched into the foyer, not bothering to wipe his Italian leather shoes. My ex-husband looked exactly as arrogant as he had 15 years ago, only now the arrogance was wrapped in a tailored executive suit. Clinging to his arm was Brittany, the former mistress, who was now his wife, sneering at our family gathering, as if she had just stepped into a homeless shelter. Before Jamal could even stand up to demand an explanation for the intrusion, Bradley crossed the dining room in 4 long strides. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a heavily embossed check, and slammed it directly onto my porcelain dinner plate. The paper soaked up a pool of cranberry sauce. "Sign the guardianship transfer papers right now." Rachel Bradley barked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I need my son's signature on a corporate intellectual property transfer by Monday morning. Do not make this difficult. Take the $100,000 and go buy yourself a better life." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the dead silence of the dining room. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply picked up my linen napkin and slowly wiped my mouth. I looked up at the man who had abandoned me at my most vulnerable. "You did not want a son 15 years ago, Bradley," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You stood in that sterile hospital room, looked at a bleeding 20-year-old woman with a fresh wound, and called your own crying infant a burden. You said we were useless baggage, dragging down your climb up the corporate ladder." Brittany rolled, her eyes crossing her arms over her expensive fur coat. "Oh, please, Rachel, stop living in the past. You are a broke single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Bradley is offering you a massive payout. You should be down on your knees thanking him." Claire immediately chimed in, leaning across the table with a scowl. "Take the money, Rachel. You live in a tiny, depressing apartment. Do not ruin Bradley's career just because you are bitter he left you for someone better. You have always been so stubborn and ungrateful." I ignored my sister's toxic betrayal. I expected nothing less from Claire, considering she had always worshipped Bradley's wealth. Instead, I kept my eyes locked on Bradley. "You do not even know his name," I stated flatly. "You barged into this house demanding a signature from a boy you have never bothered to call, let alone meet. What possible intellectual property could a teenager have that a senior vice president at a major investment firm desperately needs by Monday morning?" Bradley's face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. He slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware clatter. "That is none of your business. I am his biological father. The court will grant me custody anyway. I am offering you the easy way out. Sign the papers or I will destroy you in family court. I will expose you as an unfit, impoverished mother." He lunged forward, reaching aggressively across the table to grab Leo by the arm. Leo did not shrink back. My 15-year-old son calmly pushed his chair back and stood up to face the man who had thrown him away. Leo reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his encrypted tablet. His fingers flew across the glass screen with terrifying speed. "Touch me and the algorithm your firm is begging to buy gets permanently wiped from the mainframe," Leo said. His voice was steady, carrying an authority that mirrored my own. "You have been hunting the anonymous developer of Project Aegis for 6 months, Bradley. You need that cybersecurity software to cover your massive corporate losses before the auditors arrive next week. Touch my mother, or touch me, and I will initiate the self-destruct sequence right now. I am the developer." Bradley froze completely, his right hand hovering in midair. The arrogant sneer finally melted off his pale, shocked face. The silence in the dining room shattered the moment Brittany found her voice. Her face contorted, the heavy makeup stretching into a mask of pure fury. She lunged forward, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my son. "You little criminal!" Brittany shrieked, her voice shrill enough to make the wine glasses vibrate. "That is corporate sabotage. I am calling the police right now and having you arrested for extortion. You are just a delinquent teenager hacking into things that do not belong to you." Leo did not even blink. He tapped the screen of his tablet twice and set it face down on the table. "Call them," Leo said. "Call the police, Brittany. Tell them exactly why Bradley needs my signature on a federal intellectual property transfer by Monday morning. Tell them about the $10 million missing from his firm's offshore accounts." Bradley spun around and grabbed Brittany's arm, gripping it hard enough to make her gasp. "Shut your mouth, Brittany," he hissed, his eyes darting frantically toward Jamal. "Put the phone away right now." The sheer panic in Bradley's voice should have been enough to end the confrontation. It should have been enough for my sister to realize her uninvited guests were the villains in this room. Instead, Claire slammed her hands down on the dining table. The sudden force rattled the porcelain plates and spilled wine across the lace tablecloth. "Have you lost your mind?" "Rachel," Claire yelled, her face flushing crimson. She marched over and stood shoulder to shoulder with Bradley. "Take the money right now. You are living in a tiny, rundown 2-bedroom apartment. You clip coupons. You buy secondhand clothes. Bradley is offering you $100,000, a massive lifeline, and you are letting your disrespectful kid threaten a senior vice president. Stop ruining his career just because you are bitter he left you for a younger woman." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My own sister, the woman who had watched me bleed and cry 15 years ago, was standing in her lavish dining room defending the man who broke me. I looked at Claire. I looked at the expensive silk drapes, the custom oak table, the imported chandelier hanging above our heads. "You have always defended him, Claire," I said, keeping my voice dangerously soft. I stepped around the table, closing the distance between us. "You defended him when he walked out of my hospital room. You defended him when he paid high-priced lawyers to drain our bank accounts during the divorce. And it makes perfect sense now. You have always defended him ever since you conveniently bought this $1 million house the exact same month Bradley successfully hid his marital assets from the divorce courts." The temperature in the room plummeted. Claire took a sudden, staggering step back. All the color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. At the head of the table, Jamal slowly placed his cloth napkin next to his plate. The scrape of his chair against the hardwood floor sounded like a gunshot. As a senior corporate lawyer, Jamal built his entire career on noticing financial discrepancies. He was a man of fierce integrity, someone who believed in the absolute letter of the law. He had spent years trusting the woman he married, believing her to be as principled as he was. I watched his sharp, intelligent eyes dart from his wife to Bradley, then back to his wife. "Claire," Jamal said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, which made it far more terrifying than a shout. "We bought this house in October 15 years ago. You told me the $250,000 down payment came from an early inheritance from your grandfather, but your grandfather did not pass away until November. Claire started shaking. Jamal, please do not do this right now. We have guests. She reached for him, but Jamal stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. Did you accept a payoff from Bradley to hide his assets during a federal divorce proceeding? Jamal asked, every syllable landing like a hammer strike. Did you commit perjury, Claire? Before Claire could incriminate herself further, Bradley stepped between them. The initial shock of Leo's threat had faded, replaced by the cold, calculating instinct of a cornered predator. Bradley straightened his tie and let out a dark, mocking laugh. You always were a masterful manipulator, Rachel Bradley sneered. He reached inside his tailored jacket again, but this time he did not pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He tossed them onto the table right on top of the ruined check. You think a smart mouth and a stolen algorithm give you leverage? Bradley said, stepping so close to me I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. You are a broke single mother with no husband, no assets, and a sister who just admitted you are raising my son in a cramped, miserable apartment. I do not need your permission to take his algorithm. I just need custody. I stared down at the documents. The bold black letters across the top read, Emergency Petition for Full Paternal Custody. I filed it this morning with a judge who plays golf at my country club. Bradley whispered, his lips curling into a vicious smile. My lawyers submitted evidence that you are an unstable, low-income freelancer, completely unfit to foster a tech genius. They fabricated bank statements, twisted your freelance tax returns, and painted a picture of a desperate woman holding a brilliant boy hostage in poverty. I am his biological father. The court will grant me emergency guardianship by tomorrow afternoon. Once I have custody, I own his intellectual property rights. I own Project Aegis. I own everything. He turned toward the door, dragging a furious Brittany along with him. He paused with his hand on the brass doorknob, looking back at Leo and me with absolute contempt. See you in court, Burden. 72 hours later, the heavy oak doors of the family courthouse swung shut behind me. The air inside the courtroom was thick with the scent of floor wax and expensive cologne. I sat completely alone at the defense table, wearing a simple off-the-rack navy suit. Across the aisle, Bradley sat, flanked by a team of 3 high-priced corporate litigators. He wore a custom-tailored Italian wool suit and a gold watch that cost more than the average car. He looked entirely in his element, comfortable, arrogant, and utterly convinced of his impending victory. The lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Sterling, stood up and approached the bench. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a stain on the polished floor. Your Honor, we are here today to rectify a tragic disservice to a brilliant young man. Sterling began, his voice echoing with practiced authority. My client Bradley made the difficult decision to leave a highly volatile marriage 15 years ago. At the time, the respondent Rachel was emotionally unstable and entirely dependent. Bradley chose to step away to avoid a toxic environment. But he recently discovered that his biological son Leo possesses a once-in-a-generation technological intellect, an intellect that is currently being squandered in squalor. Sterling slid a glossy, thick binder across the polished wood to the judge. Inside that binder, Your Honor, you will find the respondent's financial records. Sterling continued, his tone dripping with condescension. Rachel is a freelance consultant. Her tax returns show an annual income of less than $40,000. She and the boy live in a cramped, unsecured 2-bedroom apartment in a high-crime neighborhood. Meanwhile, Leo has independently developed a cybersecurity algorithm of massive commercial and national importance. He is a minor. He lacks the legal and physical infrastructure to protect this intellectual property. We are asking the court to immediately transfer guardianship of Leo and all associated intellectual property rights to his father. Bradley is a senior vice president at a major investment bank. He has the resources to protect the boy and the algorithm. I sat perfectly still, listening to the character assassination. My hand rested on my purse. Inside that purse was a secure titanium drive containing the digital access keys to Apex Holdings. I could pull it out right now. I could show the judge that my personal net worth was higher than the entire GDP of some small island nations. I could prove that my $40,000 tax return was a carefully constructed cover identity I used to avoid the toxic glare of Wall Street. I could crush Bradley instantly, but I refused to play my hand. If I revealed my billionaire status now, Bradley would immediately pivot. He would realize he was outmatched, and he would bury the evidence of his $15 million embezzlement before my son and I could fully expose him. I needed him to believe he was winning. I needed him to become reckless. The judge, an older man with a weary expression, looked over his reading glasses at me. Ms. Wilson, you have declined legal counsel. Do you have a response to these allegations? I stood up and pushed my chair back. I do, Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady and clear. Mr. Sterling claims my ex-husband left a volatile marriage 15 years ago. The truth is that Bradley abandoned me while I was still recovering from an emergency C-section. He emptied our joint checking account while I was on an intravenous drip and flew to Paris with his mistress. He has not paid a single cent in child support in 1,500 months. I stepped out from behind the defense table and looked directly at Bradley. If my ex-husband is so deeply concerned about his son's well-being, I would like to ask him a few basic questions under oath. Bradley, when is Leo's birthday? Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Sterling, who immediately jumped in. Objection, Your Honor, relevance, Sterling barked. I did not wait for the judge to rule. What is Leo allergic to, Bradley? I pressed, taking another step forward. What was the name of his elementary school? What sport did he play in 7th grade? Bradley's face flushed a deep, angry red. He glared at me with absolute hatred, but remained silent. He does not know, I told the judge, turning back to the bench. He does not know because he does not care about the boy. He only cares about the boy's code. Bradley is currently under investigation by his own firm for massive corporate losses. He is desperate to acquire my son's software to patch the holes in his own failing career. Granting him guardianship is not protecting a minor. It is handing a corporate thief a free lifeline. The courtroom fell silent. I had struck a nerve, and Bradley's legal team knew it. But Sterling was a master of manipulation. He did not miss a beat. He simply smiled a cold reptilian smile and pulled another document from his briefcase. Your Honor? The respondent is clearly projecting her own bitter resentments, Sterling said smoothly. My client is a pillar of the financial community. In fact, to prove his commitment to fostering young technological talent, Bradley has just finalized a pledge to donate $2 million to the State University's new computer science wing, a wing that coincidentally falls under this very district's educational jurisdiction. The blatant bribery hung in the air. The judge, who had been listening to my argument with a flicker of sympathy, suddenly straightened up. He looked at the donation pledge. He looked at Bradley's expensive suit, and then he looked down at my simple navy blazer. The scale of justice was tipping, weighed down by corporate influence and the illusion of immense wealth. I understand the respondent's grievances regarding the past, the judge said, clasping his hands together. However, the court must prioritize the future potential and security of the minor child. A cybersecurity algorithm of this magnitude cannot be safely managed in a low-income residential setting. My heart pounded against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the judge that the algorithm was currently secured on a server farm I owned in Switzerland, guarded by former intelligence operatives. But I bit the inside of my cheek and stayed silent. I am not prepared to grant a full transfer of custody or intellectual property rights today. The judge continued, picking up his wooden gavel. However, it is clear that the child would benefit from exposure to a more stable, resource-rich environment. I am ordering a temporary mandatory weekend visitation. The minor child Leo will spend this Friday evening through Sunday evening at his father's estate to re-establish a paternal bond. We will reconvene on Monday morning to discuss the permanent transfer of the intellectual property. I slammed my hands on the defense table. Your Honor, you cannot force my son into the home of a man he does not even know. The gavel cracked down like a gunshot, echoing through the wood-paneled room. "The ruling is final, Ms. Wilson," the judge warned sternly. "Failure to comply will result in an immediate warrant for your arrest and full custody being awarded to the petitioner. Court is adjourned." The judge stood and walked out of the room through the private chambers. I stood frozen in place, my fingernails digging into the palms of my hands. Across the aisle, Bradley stood up and buttoned his jacket. He looked at me, a victorious, utterly wicked smirk spreading across his face. "Have his bags packed by 5 o'clock on Friday," Rachel Bradley said, his voice dripping with malice. "Do not worry. I will make sure the burden gets a nice, comfortable room." He turned and walked out of the courtroom with his lawyers laughing about their easy victory. They had no idea they had just invited a Trojan horse straight into their fortress. Friday evening arrived with a bitter chill as Bradley's black luxury SUV pulled through the wrought iron gates of his Connecticut estate. Leo sat in the passenger seat, his worn canvas duffel bag clutched tightly in his lap. He stared out the window at the sprawling manicured lawns and the massive stone facade of the mansion. Bradley parked the vehicle inside a climate-controlled garage that housed a small fleet of high-end sports cars. He cut the engine and turned to Leo with a wide, artificial smile. "Welcome home, son," Bradley said, popping the trunk. Leo stepped out of the vehicle and followed his father through a heavy oak door that led directly into a massive, pristine kitchen. Brittany was standing by the marble island, holding a glass of white wine. She did not offer a greeting. She did not even offer a fake smile. Instead, she looked Leo up and down with blatant disgust, her eyes lingering on his faded sneakers. "Take those shoes off right now," Brittany commanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the floor. "You are not tracking city dirt onto my imported Italian marble, and do not put your bag on the counters." Leo silently slipped off his shoes and stood in his socks. He kept his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He looked exactly like the terrified, overwhelmed teenager they expected him to be. Brittany gestured toward a stack of 3 sleek silver laptops sitting on the far end of the island. "Since you are supposedly some kind of tech genius, you can make yourself useful to earn your keep this weekend. The wireless network in the East Wing keeps dropping. Fix the routers and update the software on these machines. When you are done, stay out of the formal living room. I do not want you bumping into the antique vases. We actually value our possessions here." Bradley poured himself a glass of expensive scotch from a crystal decanter on the counter. He waved off his wife's hostility with a casual flick of his wrist. "Give the kid a break," Brittany Bradley chuckled. "He is just taking it all in. He has lived in a shoebox his entire life." Bradley walked over and threw a heavy arm around Leo's shoulders. The smell of the alcohol mixed heavily with Bradley's overpowering cologne. He steered Leo back out into the garage, walking him past a gleaming, brand-new Porsche. Bradley patted the hood of the sports car affectionately. "Your mother has kept you in poverty," Leo Bradley said, his voice dropping into a smooth, conspiratorial tone. "She let her bitterness blind her to what I could offer you. Look at this car. Look at this house. This is the life you deserve. This is the life of a winner. You like the Porsche. It is yours the minute you get your driver's license." Leo looked up at the car, forcing his eyes to widen in feigned awe. Bradley smiled, sensing weakness. "All you have to do is drop this silly grudge against me." Bradley continued, squeezing Leo's shoulder. "I know Rachel put you up to that little stunt at Thanksgiving, but you are a smart boy. You know where the real power is. Just hand over the administrative encryption keys to Project Aegis. Give me full access to the algorithm. We can be a real family. I can make you a millionaire by Monday morning, and you will never have to worry about coupon clipping again." Leo swallowed hard, making sure his voice trembled just enough to be convincing. "I need time to think about it," Leo stammered, looking back down at his socks. "It is just a lot to process. Can I just go to my room, please?" Bradley's smile widened into a victorious smirk. He thought he had completely broken the kid's resolve with nothing more than a shiny car and a few promises. "Of course," son Bradley said smoothly. "Take all the time you need." Leo was directed to the guest room at the end of a long, heavily carpeted hallway. The room was cold, perfectly decorated, and entirely devoid of life. The moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut, the terrified teenager act vanished instantly. Leo's hunched shoulders straightened. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, calculating focus that perfectly mirrored his mother. He did not unpack his clothes. He walked straight to the custom-built laptop hidden in the false bottom of his duffel bag. He pulled a modified, high-capacity USB drive from his pocket. He ignored the wireless network Brittany had complained about. Instead, he dropped to his knees, removed a wall plate, and plugged his device directly into the estate's hardwired Ethernet port. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor with the laptop balanced on his knees. His fingers flew across the keyboard with terrifying speed and precision. Bradley's home network security was expensive but embarrassingly standard. Leo bypassed the primary firewall in under 3 minutes. He ignored the entertainment systems and the smart home controls. He was hunting for the hidden network, the secure server Bradley kept entirely offline from the rest of the house. It took Leo another 12 minutes to locate the shadow server and crack its encryption using a backdoor he had specifically coded into his own hardware. The screen flashed briefly before lines of dense financial data began scrolling rapidly across the monitor. Leo leaned closer to the screen, his eyes scanning the numbers. He found offshore routing numbers, encrypted digital wallets, and a massive web of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. He traced the origin of the funds directly back to the corporate accounts of Bradley's investment bank on Wall Street. Bradley had not just been padding his expense account or taking kickbacks. He had actively siphoned exactly $15 million from his own company over the past 2 years. Leo kept digging, pulling up Bradley's synced corporate calendar. Highlighted in bright red for Monday morning was a mandatory comprehensive internal corporate audit. A team of forensic accountants was coming to review the bank's digital ledgers. The truth hit Leo with absolute clarity. Bradley did not want Project Aegis so he could sell it to the highest bidder. He needed the algorithm for its untraceable blockchain manipulation capabilities. Bradley intended to deploy Project Aegis into his own bank's mainframe to scrub the digital ledgers, rewrite the financial history, and completely hide the stolen $15 million before the auditors walked through the doors on Monday. Leo's fingers danced across the keyboard as he initiated a massive data dump. He copied every single routing number, every fake shell company invoice, and every hidden transaction log onto his encrypted drive. He compressed the files into a secure packet and sent a silent, untraceable ping directly to Rachel's secure server back in the city. Bradley thought he was locking a helpless child in a cage. He had no idea the burden was actively dismantling his entire financial empire from the guest room floor. The phone slipped from Claire's trembling fingers and clattered against the cheap linoleum floor. Jamal did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply bent down, picked up the shattered phone, and pressed the button to end the call with Bradley. The silence in the narrow apartment hallway was deafening. Jamal looked at his wife. He looked at the woman he had shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades, the mother of his children, and he saw a complete stranger. "We are going home," Jamal stated. His voice was a flat, terrifying monotone. "Right now." Claire opened her mouth, a dozen frantic excuses dying on her tongue as she met his eyes. She nodded mutely, her arrogant posture completely collapsing. The drive back to their suburban estate was suffocating. Jamal gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, staring straight ahead at the dark, winding roads. Claire sat in the passenger seat, twisting her diamond wedding band around her finger so hard her skin turned red. She tried to speak twice, but the absolute zero temperature radiating from her husband forced her back into silence. When they finally pulled into the circular driveway of their $1 million home, the pristine facade of the house suddenly looked grotesque to Jamal. He unlocked the front door and walked directly into the formal living room. He did not turn on the main lights. He stood in the shadows cast by the street lamps outside, waiting for Claire to follow him in. "Sit down," Jamal ordered. Claire hovered near the velvet armchair, her cashmere coat still clutched tightly around her shoulders. "Jamal, you are misunderstanding what you heard back there. Rachel is unstable. Bradley just needs to secure his son, and I was trying to protect our family from her toxic drama." Jamal stepped forward, the courtroom litigator taking full control of the room. "Do not insult my intelligence, Claire. I spend 80 hours a week dismantling corporate frauds crafted by men twice as smart as Bradley. You are going to tell me the truth. You are going to tell me exactly what happened 15 years ago in family court. Claire flinched. It was a long time ago. October. Jamal said, stepping closer. We closed on this house in October. $250,000 in cash. You told me it was a pre-inheritance from your grandfather. I believed you because I loved you. I trusted you. But your grandfather did not pass away until November. His estate was not settled until the following spring. Where did the cash come from, Claire? She backed away, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape. It was family money. Where did it come from? Jamal roared, finally breaking his iron composure. The walls of the living room seemed to shake. Claire broke. The manicured high society shell fractured into a million pieces, and the ugly, bitter truth spilled out in a torrent of desperate tears. It came from Bradley. Claire screamed, her chest heaving. It came from Bradley. He came to me right after he served Rachel with the divorce papers. He knew Rachel would fight him for half of his investment portfolios. He needed to move his assets offshore quickly, and he needed a witness to testify that Rachel was mentally unfit, so she would not get a single dime of alimony. Jamal stared at her, utterly sickened. He paid you. He paid you to commit perjury against your own sister. I had to do it, Claire cried, wiping her face with trembling hands. We were drowning in student loans, Jamal. You were just a junior associate working yourself to death, and we were living in a tiny rental. I wanted a life. I wanted this house. And Rachel was so arrogant. She was always so arrogant. She thought she was better than me. Better than me, better than me. She had to learn a lesson. So you sold her out? Jamal whispered, his voice laced with absolute revulsion. She was 20 years old. She was bleeding from a surgical scar holding a newborn baby, and you walked into a federal courtroom and lied under oath. You took $250,000 in stolen assets to leave your own flesh and blood destitute on the street. I did it for us, Claire pleaded, lunging forward to grab the lapels of his coat. I did it for our future. Look at the life we have now. You made partner. We have status. We have respect. If Bradley goes down for embezzlement on Monday, he will drag us down with him. The auditors will find the paper trail. They will find the payoff. You have to stay quiet, Jamal. You have to use your connections at the firm to freeze Rachel out. If you do not, we lose everything. We lose the house. We lose the country club. You could lose your license. Jamal looked down at his wife's hands clutching his coat. He felt physically ill, the very foundation of his life. His home, his marriage was built on the suffering of an innocent woman and a helpless child. Every luxury he had enjoyed for the past 15 years was bought with dirty money. He reached down and pried her fingers off his chest, pushing her away with terrifying finality. You disgust me, Jamal said. He turned his back on her and walked straight into his private study. He unlocked the heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled out thick folders containing their joint tax returns, the original deed to the house, and every bank statement dating back 15 years. He shoved the entire stack of documents into his leather briefcase. Jamal, what are you doing? Claire panicked, running into the doorway of the study. Where are you going? You cannot leave me. You cannot say a word about this. Jamal snapped the brass locks of the briefcase shut. The sound was sharp and definitive. He picked it up and walked toward the front door, forcing Claire to stumble out of his way. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, not bothering to look back at her crying face. I took an oath to the law, Claire, Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. But more importantly, I took an oath to be a good man. He opened the door and walked out into the freezing night, leaving his wife alone in the empty, silent mansion. The bell above the diner door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the late-night coffee machines and the clatter of silverware. Jamal walked into the neon-lit establishment, looking entirely out of place in his tailored overcoat, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The diner was nearly empty. I sat in a booth at the far back, nursing a cup of black coffee. I watched him approach. His usual commanding presence was overshadowed by a deep, hollow exhaustion. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. He slid into the vinyl booth across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He just stared at the scarred laminate table, the weight of 15 years of lies pressing down on his shoulders. I left her, Jamal finally said, his voice rough. I packed a bag and I walked out. I nodded slowly. I did not offer fake sympathy. Jamal was a man of the law, a man who dealt in facts, and he needed the truth now more than ever. I am sorry, Jamal. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but you needed to know who you were sharing your life with. He unclasped his leather briefcase. The brass locks clicked sharply in the quiet diner. He reached inside and pulled out a small metallic silver flash drive. He set it on the table and slid it directly across the laminate surface until it bumped against my coffee cup. That drive contains everything, Jamal stated, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I spent the last 3 hours tearing through our joint financial records, cross-referencing every offshore transfer Claire made over the last decade and a half. I found the exact shell corporation Bradley used to wire her the $250,000. The transaction is dated exactly 4 days before you sat in that federal courtroom and listened to a judge declare you financially destitute. It proves Bradley hid his assets. It proves Claire committed perjury. It is a straight line of corporate fraud and federal perjury, Rachel. It is enough to put them both in prison. I picked up the flash drive. The metal was cold against my palm. A wave of vindication washed over me. For 15 years I had built my empire in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Now the final piece of the puzzle had literally been handed to me by the very man my sister had manipulated. "Thank you, Jamal," I said softly, slipping the drive into my pocket. "You took a massive risk bringing this to me. Claire will try to destroy your career for this." "Let her try." Jamal scoffed, a bitter edge to his tone. "I will not build my legacy on the back of stolen money. But Rachel, you need to take this to the authorities immediately. You need a top-tier legal team. Bradley has an army of corporate sharks at his disposal. You cannot fight this alone with a public defender." I looked at him. I looked at the genuine concern in his eyes. He still thought I was the struggling freelancer, the helpless single mother fighting for her survival. It was time to show him the truth. It was time to pull back the curtain. "I do not need a public defender, Jamal," I said, shifting my posture. I reached down into my battered tote bag. I bypassed the cheap notebook and pulled out a device that made Jamal freeze. It was a matte black military-grade encrypted laptop, the kind of hardware exclusively used by high-level defense contractors and elite cybersecurity firms. I set it on the table and flipped the screen open. The keyboard glowed with a faint biometric scanner light. I pressed my thumb against the glass, and the system unlocked instantly, bypassing 4 layers of heavy encryption. Jamal stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. "Rachel, what exactly is that? That is a $50,000 machine." I plugged his silver flash drive into the secure port. "I am not the woman Bradley left behind, Jamal. I have not been that woman for a very long time. While Bradley was climbing the corporate ladder using stolen funds and fake prestige, I was building my own reality." I tapped a sequence of keys, executing a merge protocol. A split screen appeared. On the left side, the offshore banking records Jamal had just provided, populated in dense, organized rows. On the right side, a massive, highly classified data dump began to scroll rapidly. "What are you looking at?" Jamal asked, leaning across the table, his lawyer instincts taking over. "This is what my son brought home from his weekend at Bradley's estate," I explained, my fingers flying across the glowing keyboard. Bradley thought he was trapping a scared teenager in his mansion. He thought he could manipulate Leo with an expensive sports car. Instead, the moment Leo was alone in the guest room, he bypassed Bradley's firewall, hacked into his offline shadow server, and cloned every single hidden financial document in his network. Jamal's eyes widened in absolute shock. He hacked a senior vice president's shadow server. Leo is not just a tech genius, Jamal. He is a predator in the digital world, and Bradley invited him right through the front door. I hit the execute key, merging Jamal's flash drive data with Leo's hacked server files. The software immediately began drawing connecting lines between the two datasets, building a terrifyingly clear web of illegal transactions. "Bradley did not just hide assets during our divorce," I said, pointing to a highlighted column on the screen. "Over the past 2 years, he has actively embezzled exactly $15 million from his own investment bank. He funneled it through the same Cayman Island shell companies he used to pay off Claire." The money is gone, Jamal. Bradley lost it on highly leveraged illegal stock shorts. Jamal let out a sharp breath, running a hand over his face. That is why he wants the algorithm. That is why he filed for emergency custody. He does not want the boy. He wants Project Aegis. He needs the software to alter the bank's digital ledgers to hide the missing 15 million before anyone notices. Exactly. I smiled, watching the final data points lock into place. His firm is undergoing a massive internal audit on Monday morning. Bradley is completely out of time. He is cornered, desperate, and he is about to make a fatal mistake. I opened a new highly restricted financial terminal on the laptop. This was my personal trading platform directly linked to my offshore holding companies. I ran a quick search on the investment bank Bradley worked for. A red alert flashed on my screen indicating a major impending financial move. I looked up at Jamal, the cold, calculating thrill of absolute vengeance settling into my veins. Bradley's firm is taking out a $50 million bridge loan tomorrow morning to cover an unexpected liquidity crisis. I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. They are exposed. Bradley's embezzlement has left a massive hole in their operating capital, and they are borrowing heavily to stay afloat before the audit. Jamal stared at me slowly, realizing the sheer scale of the power I was wielding. Rachel, what are you going to do? I turned the laptop screen so Jamal could see the flashing trade execution prompt. I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled coldly. Jamal, I think it is time I buy his company's debt. The weekend evaporated into a tense, suffocating silence. When Monday morning finally broke, the sky over Manhattan was a bruised, heavy gray, reflecting the storm that was about to hit the financial district. Bradley's armored town car pulled up to the curb outside the towering glass and steel monolith of his investment bank. Leo sat in the back seat, clutching his canvas messenger bag against his chest. He kept his head down, staring at his scuffed sneakers. He played the part of the overwhelmed, intimidated teenager flawlessly. Inside his mind, however, a cold, calculated countdown had already begun. Bradley stepped out of the vehicle and buttoned his tailored suit jacket, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable command. He motioned for Leo to follow. They walked through the pristine marble-floored lobby, passing a dozen armed security checkpoints. Bradley flashed his platinum clearance badge, nodding graciously to the guards. "Bring your son to work day," Bradley announced loudly to the head receptionist, his voice echoing across the cavernous lobby with manufactured paternal pride, showing the boy where the real magic happens. They stepped into this private executive elevator, and Bradley hit the button for the top floor. The heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off the ambient hum of the lobby. Instantly, Bradley's jovial smile vanished. The muscles in his jaw tightened into hard knots. He checked his expensive wristwatch, his breathing shallow and rapid. The forensic auditors were scheduled to arrive on the trading floor in exactly 90 minutes. He was completely out of time, and his desperation was radiating off him like heat from an engine. The elevator chimed, depositing them into a hushed, heavily carpeted corridor lined with abstract art and silent administrative desks. Instead of walking toward the sprawling glass-walled corner office, Bradley steered Leo by the shoulder, guiding him aggressively down a narrow side hallway. He pushed open a heavy, solid oak door, leading into a soundproof, windowless conference room deep in the secure interior of the building. Leo stumbled slightly as he was shoved inside. He caught his balance and looked up. Sitting at the far end of a massive, polished mahogany table was Arthur Vance. Vance was a high-priced, morally bankrupt corporate mediator who specialized in making wealthy men's legal problems quietly disappear. He wore a razor-sharp gray suit and stared at Leo with the dead, unblinking eyes of a predatory reptile. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them. The electronic lock clicked with a loud, definitive snap. Bradley stood directly in front of the exit, crossing his arms over his chest, physically blocking any chance of escape. "Have a seat, son," Bradley commanded. The false warmth was completely gone from his voice, replaced by a cold metallic edge. Leo looked wildly around the room, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. He clutched his bag tighter, stepping backward until his spine hit the edge of the conference table. "What is this?" Leo stammered, his voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. You said you were going to show me the trading floor. You said we were going to get breakfast before the markets opened. Vance did not look up from his briefcase. He simply unlatched the leather straps, pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents, and slid them across the smooth wood. The papers stopped inches from Leo's trembling hand. There is a change of plans, Bradley said, stepping away from the door and advancing on Leo like a cornered wolf. The games are over. I am done playing the patient, forgiving father. You are going to sign that intellectual property transfer right now. You are going to sign over every line of code, every encryption key, and total administrative control of Project Aegis to my firm. Leo shook his head frantically, forcing his eyes to widen in absolute terror. I cannot do that. That is my mother's work. We built that together. You cannot just lock me in a room and steal it. I am not stealing it, Bradley snarled, slamming his palms flat on the table and leaning dangerously close to Leo's face. You are giving it to me willingly, because if you do not pick up a pen and sign that paper in the next 60 seconds, I am going to make sure your mother goes to federal prison. Leo let out a choked gasp, shrinking back into the heavy leather chair. You are lying. She did not do anything wrong. She has never broken a law in her life. Bradley laughed, a harsh grating sound that bounced off the soundproof walls. She committed massive financial fraud, Leo. At least that is what the court-appointed inspector is going to find when he knocks on her apartment door in exactly 30 minutes. Do you really think I would leave a custody battle to chance? Claire already took care of it. She planted the evidence yesterday afternoon. Forged eviction notices, fake debt collection letters, fabricated credit card statements showing your mother is siphoning money through illegal wire transfers. Vance finally looked up, his voice smooth and devoid of any human empathy. The documentation is extremely convincing, young man. When the inspector submits those findings to the presiding judge, your mother will be declared entirely financially and mentally unfit. She will be arrested for fraud before noon. You will be removed from her care and placed immediately in the custody of the state. Bradley reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen, and threw it onto the document. The metal clattered loudly against the table. Sign the paper, Leo. Give me the algorithm. If you do, I make a single phone call and the inspector gets called off. Your mother stays free. You get to go back to your miserable little apartment. If you refuse, she rots in a cell and you spend the rest of your childhood bouncing between foster homes. Leo sat perfectly still. He looked absolutely petrified. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes darting frantically between the gold pen, the unsmiling mediator, and his father's furious red face. His hands rested on his thighs, trembling violently. It was a masterful, flawless performance. Underneath the table, hidden entirely from Bradley's view in the shadows of the desk, Leo's trembling right hand stilled, his fingers curled into a precise, calculated posture. His index finger tapped the dark glass face of his modified smartwatch. 3 rapid, hard taps. A half-second pause. 2 more taps. The silent SOS macro engaged instantly. A microscopic indicator light on the side of the watch bezel flashed from black to solid green. The device bypassed the building's highly monitored internal network, entirely routing a heavy encrypted signal through a dedicated proxy server and connecting directly to Rachel's terminal back in her apartment. The watch's high-definition microphone went live, broadcasting an unfiltered, crystal-clear audio feed of the entire boardroom directly to his mother. "You have 10 seconds!" Bradley barked, completely unaware of the digital lifeline his son had just opened. He pointed a shaking finger at the signature line on the legal transfer. "Pick up the pen and sign it. I am not asking you again. 10, 9, 8. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a small, terrified whimper. "Please do not do this. You are ruining everything. 7, 6, 5. Bradley counted down, his face inches from Leo's, his voice rising in volume and ferocity. 4, 3. Suddenly, a sharp, deafening screech of static tore through the conference room. Arthur Vance flinched violently, dropping his pen and covering his ears. Bradley spun around, staring wildly at the ceiling. The heavy, oppressive silence of the soundproof room was completely shattered. The massive digital conference screen mounted on the far wall flared to life. The corporate bank logo vanished, replaced instantly by a solid, blinding white background. The overhead intercom system clicked, the premium speakers humming with live open feedback. Then Rachel's voice filled the room. It was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying absolute authority that made the temperature in the boardroom plummet to freezing. You have 30 seconds to step away from my son Bradley before I initiate a hostile takeover of your entire sector. Bradley stood frozen, staring at the ceiling speaker as Rachel's voice faded into the hum of the air conditioning. The blood drained from his face. For 15 years, he had controlled every narrative, manipulated every outcome, and kept Rachel perfectly marginalized. Hearing her voice here inside the most secure room of his corporate fortress shattered his reality. Arthur Vance let out a shaky breath, his eyes darting toward the locked door. Leo did not hesitate. He exploited the exact fraction of a second when the two men were paralyzed by shock. He grabbed the heavy gold fountain pen from the mahogany table, slashed a completely illegible scribble across the signature line of the intellectual property transfer, and slammed his hand down onto the laptop keyboard. He hit the enter key with brutal force. "What are you doing?" Bradley roared, spinning around and lunging for the boy. "It is too late," Leo said, pushing his chair backward and standing up. A cold, defiant smirk spread across his face, entirely replacing the terrified teenager facade. "The algorithm is transferring to your mainframe right now." The heavy oak door swung open before Bradley could grab his son. Brittany strutted into the conference room, completely oblivious to the suffocating tension. She carried a silver ice bucket containing a chilled bottle of vintage champagne and 3 crystal flutes. She wore a skin-tight designer suit and a triumphant smile. "I heard we are celebrating," Brittany announced, setting the ice bucket on the table. She looked at Leo and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "I told you he would surrender easily, Bradley. They always break when you show them real power." "Shut up, Brittany." Bradley snapped, his eyes locked on the laptop screen. On the display, a bright blue progress bar raced toward completion. Bradley let out a ragged breath of relief. He did not care how Rachel had hacked the intercom. He did not care about her empty threats. He had the algorithm. Project Aegis was uploading directly into the bank's core servers. He could run the code, scrub the audit logs, and erase the $15 million he had embezzled before the forensic accounting team arrived. The progress bar hit 99%. It hung there for an agonizing second. Then the entire screen flashed a blinding, violent shade of blood red. A loud, dissonant warning klaxon blared through the laptop speakers. Out in the hallway beyond the open conference room door, alarms began to shriek. The ambient hum of the trading floor transformed into a cacophony of panicked shouts and ringing phones. Bradley grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "What is this?" he demanded, staring at the glaring red display. A single prompt materialized in bold white lettering across the center of the screen. "Decryption key required. Processing fee, $50 million. Payable immediately to Apex Holdings." Leo picked up his canvas messenger bag and slung it over his shoulder. "I gave you the algorithm just like you asked," he said, walking casually toward the open door. "But my mother added a proprietary security measure. It is a highly aggressive ransomware payload. You just invited a Trojan horse straight past your own firewalls." Arthur Vance slammed his briefcase shut, his professional composure completely disintegrating. He locked his entire network, Bradley. The boy locked the entire corporate infrastructure. Bradley shoved Vance aside and hammered his fists onto the laptop keyboard. He pressed escape. He held down the power button. Nothing happened. The red screen remained locked, glaring back at him with the $50 million ransom demand. He pulled his mobile phone from his pocket and dialed his head of IT security. The line rang once before a frantic voice answered. "Sir," the IT director shouted over the sound of blaring alarms, "we are completely locked out. Every terminal on the trading floor is frozen. The offshore ledgers, the client portfolios, the internal audit logs, everything is encrypted behind a military-grade firewall. We cannot execute a single trade. We cannot even open our own emails. Shut it down!" Bradley screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Pull the physical servers off the grid. Do a hard reset. If we do a hard reset, without the decryption key, the Trojan will initiate a data wipe." The IT director replied, his voice cracking with panic. It will permanently delete our entire digital infrastructure. We will lose billions in client assets. Sir, the forensic auditors just walked into the lobby. They are demanding access to the trading floor logs right now. Bradley dropped the phone. It clattered onto the mahogany table next to Brittany's champagne bucket. He was out of time. If the auditors saw the locked network, they would initiate a federal investigation. They would uncover the missing $15 million. He would be arrested for embezzlement before lunch. He had only one option left. He had to pay the ransom. He had to buy the decryption key, unlock the network, and run the scrubbing algorithm before the auditors reached his floor. He snatched his phone back up and dialed the private line of his personal wealth manager at the bank's executive credit division. Bradley, his wealth manager answered, sounding extremely stressed. The entire building is in chaos. What is happening? Listen to me very carefully, Bradley ordered, gripping the phone so hard the plastic casing creaked. I need an emergency bridge loan of $50 million approved and wired to an external routing number immediately. Right this exact second. $50 million, the manager gasped. Bradley, I cannot authorize a liquid transfer of that magnitude without massive collateral. You would have to leverage everything. Your personal stock options, your estate, your entire portfolio. If the market shifts, you will be personally liable for the debt. Do it! Bradley roared, slamming his fist onto the table. Liquidate my options, leverage the estate. I am personally guaranteeing the loan. Just wire the funds to Apex Holdings right now. Arthur Vance took a step back, shaking his head in horror. You are leveraging your entire net worth to pay a digital ransom. Bradley, you are committing financial suicide. Stop this immediately. Brittany stood frozen against the wall, her mocking smile entirely erased, replaced by dawning terror as she watched her husband unravel. The wealth manager's keyboard clacked rapidly over the phone line. I am overriding the hold, the manager said, his voice tight with anxiety. The $50 million is secured against your personal assets, transferring to Apex Holdings now. Bradley stared at the blood-red laptop screen, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Come on, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Come on, unlock. A loud chime sounded from the computer. The red screen flickered and vanished. A solid green background appeared. Bold white letters spelled out a new message. Payment received. Bradley let out a massive shuddering breath, reaching for the keyboard to initiate his scrubbing protocol. We have it, he laughed hysterically, glancing at Vance. We have the network back. Before his fingers could touch the keys, the green screen vanished. The display plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. A single line of text appeared in the center of the void. System wipe initiated. The laptop fan whirred aggressively as the hard drive formatted itself. Out on the trading floor, the sounds of chaos amplified into genuine terror as every computer terminal went permanently dark. Bradley stared at this black screen, his mind completely fracturing. The decryption key was a lie. The Trojan had absorbed his $50 million, funneled it instantly into an untraceable shell company, and locked the network anyway. He had just personally leveraged $50 million of his own money into a black hole. He was completely, irrevocably destitute, and the auditors were stepping out of the elevator. His cell phone rang. The sharp, piercing tone made Bradley jump. He stared at the caller ID. It was the chief executive officer of the investment bank. Bradley answered the phone, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold the device to his ear. Sir, he whispered. Bradley! What the hell is happening on your floor? The CEO bellowed, his voice laced with absolute panic. We have a massive crisis. An anonymous private equity firm just executed a hostile buyout. They bought up all our toxic debt and leveraged our exposed bridge loans in the last 10 minutes. Bradley could not breathe. The walls of the conference room were closing in. What does that mean? He choked out. It means we have a new majority shareholder, the CEO shouted. Someone just bought the entire bank right out from under us. They sent a courier with a formal declaration. They are demanding an emergency corporate gala tomorrow night to publicly reveal themselves to the board. Pack up your office, Bradley. We are all answering to a new master tomorrow. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel hummed with the anxious, crackling energy of cornered billionaires. Crystal chandeliers cast a brittle and fractured light over the absolute elite of Manhattan's financial district. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated smoothly with silver trays of champagne, but very few guests were actually drinking. They were whispering. They were waiting. They were waiting for the executioner to arrive. Bradley stood near a towering ice sculpture, completely unable to control the violent rhythmic tremor in his left hand. His tailored Tom Ford tuxedo felt like a straitjacket tightening across his chest. He was drowning. He was absolutely drowning in a financial death spiral. $50 million of his personal wealth was gone. It had vanished instantly into the digital abyss of Leo's Trojan horse routed to an untraceable shell company. The investment bank's internal network remained a solid, impenetrable wall of encrypted code. In less than 48 hours, the federal auditors would force their way into his servers. When they discovered the locked system and the missing $15 million he had originally embezzled, he would be trading his corner office for a federal prison cell. Beside him, Brittany adjusted her heavy diamond tennis necklace, radiating oblivious and profound irritation. She held a crystal flute of champagne, her lips pressed into a tight, unhappy line. She did not understand the digital lockdown. She did not comprehend the missing $50 million. All she understood was that her husband was acting like a terrified, sweating animal at the most important social event of the season. "Stop sweating," Brittany hissed, forcing a rigid artificial smile for a passing executive. "You are ruining the photographs. You look like a guilty criminal. Stand up straight. Whoever this anonymous buyer is, you just need to charm them. You are a senior vice president, for God's sake. Act like one." Bradley closed his eyes, fighting a massive wave of intense nausea. "You do not understand, Brittany," he muttered, his voice trembling. "You do not understand anything at all. Apex Holdings did not just buy the bank. They bought my debt. They bought my leveraged bridge loans. They own me. Whoever is walking through those doors tonight holds my absolute destruction in the palm of their hand." A sudden, heavy silence rippled through the grand ballroom. The ambient chatter died instantly. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, the bow scraping awkwardly against a cello string. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung wide open. Rachel stepped over the threshold. She did not look like the struggling freelancer Bradley had discarded. She did not look like the desperate, impoverished single mother Claire had tried to destroy with fake eviction notices. She looked like absolute, unmitigated power. Rachel wore a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown that fell around her in flawless architectural lines. The fabric absorbed the light, making her look like a sharp shadow carving its way through a room full of fragile glass. A single flawless sapphire rested against her collarbone. Her posture was perfectly straight, her chin held high, and her eyes swept over the room with the cold, calculating precision of an apex predator inspecting its newly conquered territory. The massive crowd of billionaires and corporate sharks instinctively parted for her. They stepped aside, clearing a wide, unobstructed path directly to the center of the room. They did not know who she was, but immense wealth recognizes supreme power, and Rachel was radiating an authority that made the entire ballroom hold its breath. Brittany let out a sharp, incredulous gasp. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, splashing expensive wine across the sleeve of Bradley's tuxedo before shattering on the marble floor. "Is that Rachel Brittany?" shrieked her high-pitched voice, cutting violently through the hushed silence of the ballroom. "What is she doing here? How did she even get past the front door?" Bradley turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto his ex-wife. His brain simply refused to process the visual information. Rachel was supposed to be weeping in her tiny apartment. Rachel was supposed to be facing federal fraud charges. Rachel was absolutely not supposed to be gliding across a marble floor wearing a dress that cost more than a luxury sports car. Brittany's shock rapidly mutated into vicious territorial outrage. Her fragile ego could not handle the sight of the woman she had mocked looking like absolute royalty. She marched directly toward the center of the room, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. Bradley stumbled blindly after her, his mind spinning in a dark haze of panic and total confusion. Brittany intercepted Rachel just steps away from the main podium. She planted herself firmly on the marble floor, physically blocking Rachel's path. "What kind of sick, pathetic joke is this?" Brittany demanded, her voice echoing loudly across the silent room. Her face flushed with angry, blotchy red patches. "You think you can rent a dress and crash a private corporate gala? You think you belong in a room with these people? You are nothing but a broke, pathetic loser trying to cling to my husband's coattails." Rachel did not blink. She did not flinch. She simply looked at Brittany with profound, absolute boredom. She looked at Brittany the way one looks at a speck of dirt on a pristine window. The silence in the room became heavy, tight, and incredibly dangerous. "Security!" Brittany screamed, waving her arm frantically toward the burly men in earpieces standing near the perimeter of the room. "Security. Get over here right now. How did this trash get in here? I want her thrown out into the street immediately. She is trespassing." Two massive security guards moved swiftly through the crowd. Bradley reached them just as they stopped beside his wife. He grabbed Brittany's arm, trying desperately to pull her back. A terrible sinking dread was finally taking root deep in his chest. The pieces of the puzzle were violently slamming into place. The Trojan horse, the $50 million, Apex Holdings. "Throw her out," Brittany commanded, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at Rachel's face. "Throw this trash out before I have you both fired." The head of security, a towering man with a thick neck and a grim expression, looked at Brittany. He looked at her outstretched pointing finger. Then he completely ignored her. He stepped smoothly past Brittany. He stopped precisely 2 feet in front of Rachel. He brought his hands together, lowered his eyes, and offered a deep, highly respectful bow. "Right this way, ma'am," the head of security announced, his deep voice ringing with absolute reverence across the silent ballroom. "The board has been waiting for you." Brittany's jaw hit the floor. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow wax mannequin. Bradley stumbled backward, his knees buckling as the horrifying, impossible truth finally shattered his reality. Rachel was not the victim. She was the architect. She had bought his debt, she had bought his bank, and now she owned his entire life. Brittany stared at the towering head of security, her brain completely short-circuiting. Her mouth opened and closed silently for a fraction of a second before her socialite programming violently rejected reality. "Are you insane?" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch that made several nearby executives flinch. "She is a fraud. She is a completely broke, pathetic freelancer who lives in a shoebox. Look at her. That dress is probably stolen. She is a stalker. She is obsessed with my husband, and she forged her way into this gala to humiliate us. Arrest her right now." The head of security did not move a single muscle. He maintained his respectful posture, keeping his broad shoulders angled defensively between Rachel and the screaming woman. He looked at Brittany with the cold, detached professionalism of a man who only took orders from the person who signed his paychecks. And as of an hour ago, that person was Rachel. "Do your job," Brittany yelled, stepping forward and attempting to shove her way past the security chief. "Throw this trash out into the street where she belongs. She is trespassing." Rachel stood perfectly still, her expression entirely serene. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage. She simply watched Brittany unravel, allowing the younger woman to publicly destroy her own carefully curated high society image. The surrounding crowd of billionaires, hedge fund managers, and corporate board members had completely stopped their conversations. They were watching the spectacle with predatory fascination. Bradley finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The sheer, overwhelming terror of his situation collided violently with his massive ego. He could not accept that the woman he had discarded, the woman he had actively tried to destroy, was holding the reins of his entire corporate existence. His mind rejected the concept of Rachel possessing $50 million, let alone the billions required to execute a hostile takeover of a global investment bank. It had to be a trick. It had to be a bluff. "Shut up," Brittany, Bradley hissed, grabbing his wife by the shoulder and hauling her back. He turned his furious, bloodshot eyes on Rachel. The veneer of the polished senior vice president evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered bully. He lunged forward, bypassing the security guard with a sudden, aggressive movement. He reached out and grabbed Rachel's bare arm, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. "You are leaving right now." Bradley growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble, meant only for her ears. "I do not know what kind of pathetic scam you are running with this Apex Holdings nonsense, but you are not doing this to me. You are not ruining my night. I will drag you out the service elevator myself if I have to. Walk." Rachel did not struggle against his grip. She simply looked down at his hand gripping her arm, then looked slowly up into his panicked eyes. Her gaze was colder than the ice sculptures melting on the buffet tables. "Let go of me, Bradley," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "I said walk," he barked, tightening his grip and attempting to yank her forward off balance. Before Bradley could pull her a second time, a tall figure in a sharp, tailored tuxedo stepped smoothly out of the crowd. Jamal moved with the swift, precise grace of a man fully prepared for a physical altercation. He raised his hand and brought it down in a sharp, brutal chopping motion directly onto Bradley's wrist. The strike echoed with a loud, cracking smack. Bradley let out a sharp cry of pain, his hand flying open and releasing Rachel instantly. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist against his chest, his eyes wide with shock and fury. Jamal stepped smoothly between Bradley and Rachel, squaring his shoulders. His face was carved from granite. "Assaulting the majority shareholder is a federal offense." "Bradley." Jamal stated, his voice booming across the silent ballroom with the absolute authority of a veteran prosecutor. "And as chief legal counsel for Apex Holdings, I will personally see to it that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Bradley stared at Jamal, his mouth hanging open. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. "Jamal, what are you doing? You work for me. You are my lawyer. We had an agreement. Claire and I had an agreement." "Your agreement was based on extortion and financial fraud." Jamal countered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "I do not work for criminals, Bradley. I work for the law. I spent yesterday evening reviewing the offshore ledgers your son graciously liberated from your shadow server. The SEC has already been notified of the $15 million you embezzled. They are waiting for you outside the building." The entire grand ballroom went dead silent. The air grew instantly heavy, suffocatingly tight. Not a single glass clinked. Not a single breath was drawn loudly. The wealthy elite, the board of directors, the massive shareholders, all stood frozen, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. Then the whispers erupted. The sound started as a low hiss and quickly escalated into a frantic, buzzing swarm. The words embezzlement, hostile takeover, and federal investigation rippled through the crowd of billionaires. The corporate sharks were smelling blood in the water, and they were instinctively backing away from Bradley and Brittany, isolating them in the center of the marble floor. Brittany looked around wildly, her chest heaving as the reality of her shattered social standing crashed down upon her. The very people she had spent years desperately trying to impress were now staring at her with open, unmasked revulsion. She was no longer the wife of a powerful executive. She was married to a disgraced, bankrupt criminal. Rachel adjusted the silk sleeve of her gown where Bradley had grabbed her. She did not look at her ex-husband again. He was no longer relevant. He was already a ghost. She turned and began walking toward the grand stage at the far end of the ballroom. The sea of elite guests parted for her instantly. Men in custom suits bowed their heads slightly. Women in diamonds stepped back, clearing a wide, unobstructed path. The current CEO of the investment bank, a gray-haired man who had spent the last hour sweating through his tuxedo, was standing rigidly beside the main podium. As Rachel approached the steps, the CEO hastily descended. He extended a trembling hand, offering her the microphone. He bowed his head respectfully, stepping aside and surrendering his stage, his company, and his power to the new owner. Rachel walked up the steps, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. She stepped up to the podium and took the microphone from the stand. The harsh screech of electronic feedback instantly silenced the remaining whispers in the ballroom. She stood under the blinding spotlight, looking out over the sea of faces. She found Bradley standing near the back, looking small, broken, and utterly defeated. "Ladies and gentlemen." Rachel's voice resonated through the massive speakers. calm, steady, and vibrating with absolute triumph. 15 years ago, a man in this room called me and my newborn son a burden. He told me I lacked the vision to survive in his world. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of her vengeance settle over the room. Today, I am the CEO of Apex Holdings. And I just bought this entire company. Bradley's mind short-circuited. The sheer mathematical impossibility of the moment crushed the breath right out of his lungs. He stared at the woman standing on the grand stage, trying to reconcile the terrified, penniless girl he had abandoned 15 years ago with the absolute titan commanding the room. How had she done it? He had frozen her bank accounts. He had destroyed her credit score. He had weaponized the legal system to ensure she could not even secure a basic business loan. But that was his fatal error. The logic of his own cruelty crashed down on him with devastating force. By locking her out of the traditional financial system, he had forced her to master the shadows. She had to learn the intricate, unregulated mechanics of offshore routing just to hide her meager freelance earnings from his predatory lawyers. She had to understand algorithmic market fluctuations to multiply the few dollars she had left. While Bradley was busy projecting the illusion of wealth funding luxury cars, on credit paying exorbitant country club dues with leveraged loans and bleeding his own company dry to maintain his status, Rachel was building an empire. She had accumulated actual liquid capital. She had forged an impenetrable syndicate of ghost investors, tech innovators, and ruthless legal minds. She was not playing the game. She had bought the board it was played on. The grand ballroom was so silent that the clinking of a single dropped ice cube echoed like a gunshot. The elite guests, the very people Bradley had spent a decade desperately trying to impress, physically recoiled from him. They backed away in synchronized horror, leaving a wide circle of empty marble floor around him and his wife. Brittany was shaking uncontrollably. She looked down at her diamond necklace as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. She looked at the faces of the socialites who had smiled at her just 20 minutes ago. They were staring at her with open, unmasked revulsion. She realized with a wave of nauseating clarity that every piece of jewelry, every designer bag, every lavish vacation she had enjoyed was funded by a dying man's desperate fraud. She took a slow, trembling step away from Bradley, instinctively trying to sever herself from the sinking ship, but the crowd refused to let her blend back in. Rachel tapped the microphone. The sharp sound snapped everyone to attention. She raised her left hand and snapped her fingers toward the elevated tech booth at the rear of the ballroom. Instantly, the four massive high-definition LED screens suspended around the perimeter of the room flickered. The investment bank's proud gold logo vanished. The screens ignited with stark, blindingly bright financial spreadsheets, redacted bank statements, and legal documents. The collective gasp from the audience sucked the remaining oxygen from the room. Allow me to introduce you to your former senior vice president's true portfolio. Rachel announced, her voice echoing with crystal-clear surgical precision. You all believed Bradley was a master of the market. You believed he was generating unprecedented returns. The truth is much simpler. He is a common thief. She gestured elegantly to the massive screen on her right. It displayed a highly detailed ledger dominated by a massive highlighted red deficit. Here we have a detailed accounting of the $15 million Bradley siphoned directly from his clients' pension funds over the last 36 months. You will notice the funds were not reinvested. They were routed through a maze of shell companies in the Cayman Islands to support his personal lifestyle. Every wire transfer, every hidden account, every fraudulent signature is currently being handed over to the SEC agents waiting in the lobby. Bradley opened his mouth to scream a denial, but his throat was completely dry. No sound came out. He was paralyzed by the absolute, undeniable proof of his guilt being broadcast in real time to the most powerful people in the city. Near the back exit, he caught a fleeting glimpse of Arthur Vance, his ruthless corporate fixer, slipping quietly out the door to save himself. Rachel gestured to the screen on her left. Here we have the fabricated evidence Bradley's legal team manufactured just yesterday. Fake eviction notices, forged credit card statements, fabricated debt collection letters. He intended to use these fraudulent documents to declare me mentally and financially unfit, purely to steal custody of my son. And why did he want my son? The central screen directly behind Rachel shifted. It displayed the intellectual property transfer document that Leo had scribbled his fake signature on barely an hour ago, right alongside a complex breakdown of a software algorithm. Because my son is a genius, Rachel stated, her eyes locking onto Bradley with terrifying, relentless intensity. Bradley discovered that Leo and I had developed Project Aegis. He believed it was a highly advanced scrubbing algorithm. He believed he could use our intellectual property to erase his digital fingerprints, wipe the corporate mainframe, and hide his $15 million embezzlement before the federal auditors found it. So he cornered my son in a soundproof room and threatened to have me thrown in federal prison if Leo did not surrender the code. The murmurs in the crowd shifted from shock to absolute outrage. Men and women who routinely engaged in ruthless corporate warfare drew a hard, unforgiving line at threatening a child. Bradley could feel their disgust radiating toward him like physical heat. He was entirely destroyed. He had no money, no allies, and no escape. Rachel stepped out from behind the podium. She walked to the very edge of the grand stage, looking down at the broken, hyperventilating man shivering on the marble floor. "You wanted my son's algorithm to hide your theft," Bradley Rachel announces into the mic. "But my son designed that code specifically to hunt down offshore tax evasion. You didn't buy a shield, you bought a spotlight." The silence holding the ballroom captive shattered into a roar of executive outrage. The gray-haired CEO, who had handed Rachel the microphone only moments before, marched down the steps of the stage with a face like thunder. He was flanked by 6 senior members of the board of directors, their expressions shifting rapidly from initial shock to absolute murderous fury. They descended upon Bradley like wolves sensing a wounded animal in their territory. Bradley tried to stumble backward, clutching his bruised wrist against his chest, but the 2 massive security guards stood firm behind him, forming an impenetrable human wall. There was nowhere to run. The exit was blocked. The shadows he had operated in for a decade had been flooded with blinding, inescapable light. "You are finished, Bradley." The CEO spat, his voice trembling with a rage that transcended professional decorum. "As of this exact second, your employment at this bank is terminated with cause. You are stripped of all executive privileges. Your equity shares are frozen pending federal seizure, and your entire corporate pension is voided. You will not leave this building with a single cent." Bradley shook his head frantically, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "You cannot do this to me. I built the high-yield division. I generated billions in revenue for this firm over the last 10 years. You need me." An older woman from the board of directors stepped forward, her diamond earrings catching the harsh light of the financial records still glaring on the massive LED screens above. "You generated massive liabilities, you arrogant fool," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at his face. "You exposed this entire institution to federal indictment. You used our highly secure infrastructure to launder stolen money to feed your pathetic ego. You are not a banker, Bradley. You are a liability, and we are cutting you loose." Brittany stood frozen a few feet away, the shattered remnants of her crystal champagne flute glittering dangerously around her designer heels. Her gaze darted frantically from the glaring red deficit on the overhead screens to the furious, unforgiving faces of the board, and finally to her husband. The pristine, bulletproof illusion of her high society life was evaporating in real time. Her breathing hitched, turning into rapid, shallow, panicked gasps. She lunged forward, ignoring the executives, and grabbed Bradley by the lapels of his ruined Tom Ford tuxedo. She shook him violently, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. "Is it true?" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch that easily drowned out the muttering crowd of billionaires. "Tell me it is a lie, Bradley. Tell me you still have the money. Tell me we are fine." Bradley looked down at her with dead, completely empty eyes. The reality of his absolute ruin had finally paralyzed his nervous system. "It is gone, Brittany," he whispered hoarsely, staring right through her. "All of it. The offshore accounts, the stock options, the trust funds. The 50 million I wired this morning to buy the decryption key. It is all gone. Brittany pushed him away with brutal, unhinged force. Bradley staggered backward, nearly tripping over his own feet before hitting the chest of a security guard. "You lied to me!" Brittany screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You told me you were rich. You told me we were untouchable. You made me give up my career to be a society wife. You are broke. You dragged me into this miserable, illegal mess, and you are completely, utterly broke." The realization of her impending poverty hit Brittany like a speeding freight train. The designer clothes, the summer homes in the Hamptons, the exclusive country club memberships, they were all turning to dust before her eyes. Her survival instincts, honed by years of ruthless social climbing and calculating networking, immediately kicked in. She spun around, turning her back entirely on the broken, weeping man she had married. She smoothed down the front of her expensive silk dress, forced her facial muscles to relax, and plastered on a smile so wide and desperate it looked physically painful. She took a slow, deliberate step toward the grand stage, looking up at the woman standing under the spotlight. Rachel Brittany called out, her tone dripping with a sickening manufactured sweetness. "Rachel, please, you have to listen to me." She clasped her hands together in a theatrical display of pleading, batting her eyelashes. "I had no idea he was doing this. I swear to you on my life. I am a victim here too. Bradley manipulated me just like he manipulated you all those years ago. He controlled all the finances. He hid the bank statements from me. We women, we have to stick together against toxic men like him. You know exactly how controlling and abusive he can be." Rachel stood at the very edge of the stage, her posture perfectly rigid. She did not blink. She did not offer a single flicker of empathy or understanding. In fact, she did not even look at Brittany's face. She looked right through her, rendering the desperate, pleading socialite entirely invisible. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life demanding to be the absolute center of attention, Rachel's complete and utter indifference was the most devastating insult imaginable. Rachel slowly raised her right hand. She snapped her fingers. The sharp, decisive sound cut cleanly through Brittany's frantic pleading. Jamal, the chief legal counsel who had neutralized Bradley moments earlier, stepped smoothly out from the shadows near the podium. He walked down the stage steps with purposeful, heavy strides. He carried a thick, massive stack of manila folders tucked under his arm. He approached Brittany, his face devoid of any human emotion, and forcefully shoved the heavy stack of legal documents directly into her chest. Brittany instinctively caught the folders before they could hit the marble floor. The sheer weight of the paper made her stagger slightly. She stared down at the bold, black legal lettering on the top page, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror. "What is this?" she whispered, her fake smile collapsing entirely, leaving her looking terrified and small. "I did not do anything wrong. I am just his wife. I did not steal any money." Rachel finally looked down at her. Her gaze was piercing, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. She leaned into the microphone, ensuring her voice carried to every single billionaire board member and federal agent waiting in the wings. "Those are lawsuits for corporate espionage and harassment," Rachel says coldly. "We have the security footage of you attempting to intimidate my son outside his high school. We have the digital footprint of you paying private investigators to illegally access my medical records and fabricate financial distress. But more importantly, we have the marriage contract you signed so eagerly to secure your status." Rachel let a hard, unforgiving smile touch the corners of her mouth. "You did not sign a prenuptial agreement, Brittany. You wanted unrestricted access to his wealth without any protective boundaries. Now you get unrestricted access to his liabilities. You are jointly liable for his $50 million debt, Brittany. Enjoy the luxurious lifestyle you stole from me." Claire stood near the towering floral arrangements at the edge of the grand ballroom, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had watched the entire execution unfold from the shadows. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug so violently into her expensive leather clutch that the gold clasp completely snapped. She had come to the gala tonight to network, to gloat, and to cement her place in Manhattan's upper echelon alongside Bradley. She had spent the last week meticulously orchestrating Rachel's ruin. She was the one who had forged the eviction notices. She was the one who had fabricated the credit card statements and bribed the court-appointed inspector. It was supposed to be a flawless, untraceable victory that left Rachel locked in a psychiatric hold while Bradley seized the Aegis algorithm. Looking up at those massive LED screens, Claire saw her own fraudulent documents projected in 30-foot high resolution for the wealthiest people in the city to see. She saw the undeniable digital footprints of her crimes laid bare. The SEC was in the lobby. The federal authorities were already swarming the building. Rachel was not just a survivor, she was the architect of their total annihilation. A suffocating wave of pure terror washed over Claire. She could hear the vicious whispers of the elite crowd turning against Bradley and Brittany. She knew exactly how corporate bloodbaths worked. When the feds started asking questions, Bradley would immediately offer up his accomplices in exchange for a plea deal. He would throw her to the wolves without a second thought. She had to leave right now. Claire abandoned her half-empty champagne flute on a passing waiter's silver tray. She kept her head down, using the chaotic, murmuring crowd as a shield. She ignored the wealthy socialites she had been desperately trying to impress just 10 minutes ago. Her mind was racing through a frantic, desperate checklist. She needed to get to her car. She needed to transfer her liquid assets into offshore accounts before the authorities froze everything. She needed to book a one-way flight out of the country before morning. She slipped away from the main floor, pushing through a pair of heavy velvet curtains that concealed the staff corridors. The pulsing classical music of the ballroom instantly muffled, replaced by the stark clinical silence of the back hallways. Claire kicked off her agonizingly high designer heels, picking them up so she could run faster. She sprinted down the narrow, dimly lit corridor toward the rear exit, her breath tearing through her throat in ragged gasps. She reached the heavy steel emergency exit door at the end of the hallway. She threw her entire body weight against the crash bar. The door did not budge. It was magnetically locked from the outside. Claire let out a frustrated cry and slammed her hands against the cold metal. She frantically searched her clutch for her phone, intending to call her driver to force the door open from the alleyway. "Going somewhere, Claire?" The deep, familiar voice echoed from the shadows near the service elevator. Claire spun around, dropping her shoes onto the concrete floor. She pressed her back against the locked steel door, her chest heaving. Jamal stepped into the dim overhead light. He wore his sharp, tailored tuxedo, looking as immaculate and commanding as he had when he broke Bradley's wrist on the ballroom floor. But there was no professional courtesy in his eyes now. There was only a cold, unyielding judgment that chilled Claire to her very core. "Jamal." Claire gasped, a flood of manufactured relief washing over her face. She immediately slipped into her default survival mechanism, playing the terrified, fragile victim. "Thank God you are here. We have to get out of this building right now. Bradley has gone completely insane. He dragged me into some kind of illegal scheme, and I just found out about it. We need to go home to the kids. Please, Jamal, help me get this door open." Jamal did not move. He stood 10 feet away, staring at the woman he had been married to for 8 years. He looked at her with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute finality. He slowly reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. "You are not going home, Claire," Jamal said, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he used to reserve for her. Claire's fake smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "Jamal, I am your wife. We are a team. We have to protect our family from this mess. Bradley set me up." Jamal took 2 steps forward and held the envelope out to her. He did not break eye contact. "I am protecting my family," Jamal stated firmly. "Just not from Bradley. I am protecting them from you." Claire slowly reached out with trembling hands and took the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. She ripped open the seal and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. The bold black lettering at the top of the first page seemed to brand itself directly into her brain. "Divorce papers," Jamal said, his tone utterly clinical. "And a federal subpoena." Claire stared at the documents, her vision blurring with panic. "Jamal, you cannot do this. You are my husband. You are supposed to defend me. You are a lawyer." "I am the chief legal counsel for Apex Holdings." Jamal corrected her, his jaw set in a hard line. Rachel hired me months ago to conduct a quiet internal audit of Bradley's division. I was looking for embezzlement. I was looking for corporate fraud. Do you have any idea how devastating it was to trace the fake eviction notices, the bribed inspectors, and the fabricated credit card debt directly back to the IP address inside my own home? I watched you kiss our children goodnight, and then I watched you log onto your laptop to systematically destroy another mother's life. Claire shook her head wildly, tears of genuine panic finally spilling over her eyelashes. No, no, Jamal, you have it all wrong. Bradley forced me to do it. He threatened me. Save your lies for the judge, Jamal interrupted, his voice echoing sharply in the narrow corridor. I handed the unredacted evidence of your perjury, your digital forgery, and your bribery to the district attorney this morning. The authorities have a warrant for your arrest. And as of an hour ago, I filed an emergency injunction with the family court. I am taking full custody of our children to protect them from your toxicity. You will not be allowed within 500 yards of them. Claire let out a choked, agonizing sob. The manila envelope slipped from her grasp, the divorce papers and federal subpoenas scattering across the dirty concrete floor. Her entire world, her wealth, her status, her family had just been vaporized in a matter of seconds. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Rachel stepped out of the shadows, her midnight blue silk gown gliding effortlessly over the concrete. She walked up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Jamal. Her expression was perfectly calm, radiating the quiet, devastating peace of a woman who had finally balanced the scales. Claire collapsed onto her knees. The expensive fabric of her gown soaked up the grime from the floor, but she did not care. She looked up at her sister, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She clasped her hands together, sobbing hysterically. Rachel, please, Claire begged, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. Please do not do this to me. I was wrong. I was so jealous of you and I was greedy, but please call Jamal off. Call off the lawyers. Do not let them take my kids away. We are sisters, Rachel. We grew up together. You cannot put me in prison. Please have mercy on me. We are blood. Rachel looked down at the weeping, broken woman groveling at her feet. She did not raise her voice. She did not show an ounce of anger. She simply delivered the absolute truth. Blood makes you related, Claire. Loyalty makes you family. You chose your side 15 years ago. Rachel turned and walked right past her, heading back toward the ballroom to claim her empire, leaving Claire kneeling alone in the shadows to face the absolute ruin she had built for herself. Rachel stepped back into the blinding light of the grand ballroom, leaving the shadows of the service corridor and her sister's ruined life behind her. The atmosphere in the massive hall had shifted from stunned silence to a low, dangerous hum of predatory whispers. The city's elite were actively distancing themselves from the center of the room. They were forming a wide, unforgiving perimeter around the man who had just been publicly stripped of his wealth, his title, and his dignity. Bradley was still on his knees on the cold marble floor. His custom Tom Ford tuxedo was wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. He clutched his rapidly swelling broken wrist against his chest, rocking back and forth in a state of absolute psychological collapse. His mind had completely fragmented. The logic was gone. The money was gone. The power was gone. The impenetrable fortress of arrogance he had built over 15 years had been reduced to ash in a matter of minutes. He raised his head, his bloodshot eyes darting wildly around the room. He looked at the board members turning their backs on him. He looked at the security guards blocking his exit. He looked at his wife, Brittany, who was currently weeping into the arms of a federal subpoena. Then his frantic gaze locked onto the grand stage. Leo was standing near the podium. The teenager had descended from the tech booth holding a sleek black tablet in his hands. He was tapping the screen with practiced, casual efficiency, securing the final data transfers that locked Bradley out of the corporate mainframe forever. Leo did not look frightened. He did not look intimidated by the sea of billionaires or the massive glittering chandelier above him. He looked entirely in control. He looked exactly like his mother. Something dark and utterly unhinged snapped inside Bradley's brain. The realization of absolute zero shattered his final tether to reality. He had nothing left to lose, and in that vacuum of consequence, a twisted, desperate delusion took hold. If Rachel owned everything, and the Aegis algorithm was the key to that empire, then the creator of that algorithm was his only remaining asset. Leo was his blood. Leo was a minor. In Bradley's fractured, desperate mind, that biological fact was a legal loophole. It was a lifeline. It was a hostage waiting to be claimed. Bradley let out a sudden, guttural scream. It was an ugly, animalistic sound that tore through the refined acoustics of the ballroom, causing several nearby guests to physically flinch. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agonizing pain shooting up his shattered arm. He moved with a sudden feral burst of speed, completely catching the surrounding security guards off guard. He shoved past a paralyzed waiter, sending a silver tray of crystal glasses crashing violently to the marble floor. Shards of glass exploded outward, but Bradley did not even blink. He charged directly toward the grand stage, his eyes wide, manic, and fixed entirely on the teenager holding the tablet. "He is my son!" Bradley roared, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated madness as he sprinted across the open floor. "I am his father. I am his biological father. Every single line of that code belongs to me. Every patent, every dollar, every asset that boy created is my legal property. You cannot take this from me. He is mine." Rachel did not run to intercept him. She did not scream for security. She simply stood perfectly still, watching the pathetic charging man with eyes as cold as a winter ocean. Bradley reached the bottom of the wooden stage steps, his breathing ragged, his face slick with sweat. He lunged upward, throwing his heavy frame toward the stage platform. He reached out with his uninjured, trembling hand, his fingers curling like claws, desperate to physically grab the teenager by the collar, desperate to drag him away and use him as a human shield against the financial ruin crushing down upon him. He expected the boy to cower. He expected Leo to freeze in terror, just as Rachel had frozen in terror all those years ago when Bradley had thrown her out onto the street. Leo did not freeze. He did not flinch. He possessed his mother's ice-cold composure, forged in the fires of survival and perfected by absolute intelligence. Without looking up from his tablet, Leo executed a smooth, effortless pivot. He casually shifted his weight and took one precise step to the left. Bradley grasped at empty air. His heavy, desperate momentum carried him violently forward. Unable to stop himself, Bradley crashed hard onto the polished wooden floor of the stage, his bruised ribs slamming brutally against the edge of the podium. He let out a sharp, breathless wheeze, collapsing into a miserable heap of tangled limbs and ruined silk. Leo slowly lowered his tablet. He looked down at the gasping, hyperventilating man sprawling at his feet. The teenager's expression was utterly devoid of fear, anger, or even pity. He looked at Bradley with the profound, detached boredom of someone inspecting a stain on the sidewalk. "You signed away your parental rights 15 years ago," Bradley Leo stated. His voice was steady, resonant, and projected perfectly into the microphone still active on the podium. The words echoed through the massive speakers, ringing out across the silent, captivated ballroom. Bradley clutched his chest, struggling to push himself up on his good arm, staring up at the boy in horrified confusion. Leo tilted his head slightly, delivering the killing blow with surgical precision. "You did not want to pay the $300 a month in basic child support, so you convinced a judge to sever your legal ties to avoid the financial liability. You threw us away to save a few pennies. And just to ensure there were no lingering loopholes, Jamal helped us finalize the absolute termination of any remaining biological claims last week in federal court." Leo crouched down slightly, bringing his face level with Bradley's panicked, bloodshot eyes. "You have no claim to my code. You have no claim to my mother's company. You have no claim to me. You are legally a stranger to me." Bradley's mouth opened, but his vocal cords refused to function. The final heavy iron door had just slammed shut, locking him in the dark. His own greed, his own selfish desire to hoard his wealth 15 years ago, had formed the very legally binding chains that now prevented him from touching the empire standing right in front of him. He was totally, completely isolated. He had no money, no wife, no allies, no lawyer, and no son. He was a ghost trapped in a ruined body. He slumped back against the stage stairs, his chin resting against his chest, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. The fight drained out of him, leaving only the hollow, suffocating reality of his total destruction. Suddenly, a loud, booming thud echoed from the rear of the ballroom. The heavy brass-studded oak doors at the main entrance were thrown forcefully open, slamming against the marble walls with a violent crash. The synchronized sound of heavy tactical boots marching onto the marble floor cut sharply through the silence. The towering glass windows of the grand ballroom, which had previously reflected the sparkling city skyline, suddenly flared with intense, pulsating light. The flashing red and blue strobes of a dozen police cruisers and federal black SUVs illuminated the glass, casting an eerie, rhythmic spinning glow over the terrified faces of the elite guests. The authorities had locked down the entire perimeter. The trap was sprung. The crowd of billionaires, hedge fund managers, and socialites parted instantly, scrambling backward in a panicked frenzy to avoid being caught in the federal dragnet. A tall, broad-shouldered lead agent marched straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked onto the pathetic, shivering heap of a man slumped against the wooden steps. "Bradley Vance," the agent's voice boomed with absolute authority, cutting through the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for massive corporate fraud, grand larceny, wire fraud, and federal embezzlement." Two heavily armed agents hauled Bradley to his feet by his armpits, completely ignoring his cries of pain as they wrenched his broken wrist behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the ballroom. It was the sound of absolute finality. Bradley did not fight them. The fight had been completely bled out of him. As the agents dragged his sagging body backward, he lifted his heavy, tear-streaked face and looked toward the stage. He looked at Rachel. She stood under the blinding spotlight, wrapped in midnight blue silk, radiating the terrifying, majestic power of an absolute sovereign. She looked beautiful. She looked untouchable. Then his eyes shifted to Leo, the brilliant, composed teenager who had engineered his total destruction without breaking a sweat. A wave of profound, agonizing regret crashed over Bradley, so heavy and suffocating it made him physically gag. His mind replayed the choices he had made 15 years ago. He had possessed a brilliant, fiercely loyal wife and a son with a mind that could literally reshape the global market. He could have nurtured that brilliance. He could have built a legitimate, unstoppable dynasty with them. Instead, he had thrown them out into the cold, traded them for the superficial affection of a shallow socialite, and spent his life chasing fake prestige with stolen money. He had traded a kingdom for a federal prison cell. He let out a low, miserable sob as the reality of his wasted life finally broke him. Across the room, Brittany realized what was happening. She pressed herself flat against a marble pillar, desperately trying to blend into the shadows, hoping the federal agents would simply pass her by. She began inching toward the cloakroom, her eyes darting wildly toward the exit. Not so fast. Mrs. Vance, a sharp female voice, intercepted her. A female FBI agent stepped directly into Brittany's path, holding up a federal warrant. "Brittany Vance, you are under arrest as a primary co-conspirator. We have the offshore routing documents and the shell company ledgers bearing your digital signatures." "No." Brittany shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat like a dying animal. Her carefully curated high society persona instantly disintegrated into pure feral panic. She thrashed wildly, kicking her designer heels and swinging her manicured hands as the agent forcefully spun her around. "I did not do anything. I am a victim. He made me sign those papers. Do not touch me. Do you know who I am?" The high society crowd, the very people Brittany had spent a decade groveling to impress, watched her humiliating meltdown with absolute, unmasked disgust. Women in diamonds covered their mouths in horror. Corporate titans shook their heads in contempt. Brittany and Bradley were paraded out of the grand ballroom in disgrace, dragged through the flashing police lights, and shoved into the back of a waiting armored transport vehicle. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing their doom. Back inside the ballroom, the silence was deafening. The federal agents secured the perimeter, waiting for further instruction. The remaining board of directors stood frozen near the front row, staring up at the stage in absolute awe. Rachel smoothed the front of her gown. She did not look toward the exit. She did not waste another second on the ghosts of her past. She turned her attention to the gray-haired CEO and the terrified executives gathered below her. "Gentlemen," Rachel announced, her voice calm, resonant, and vibrating with command. "I believe we have a bank to run." She descended the stage steps with perfect grace. The sea of executives instantly parted, clearing a path for her as she walked directly toward the massive polished mahogany conference table that had been set up for the evening's keynote address. Rachel pulled out the heavy leather chair at the absolute head of the table and sat down. She steepled her fingers, resting them on the polished wood. The board members hastily scrambled to take their seats around her, pulling out chairs with trembling hands, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of terror and deep respect. This institution has been infected by a culture of toxic arrogance and systemic corruption. Rachel stated, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the most powerful men in the financial sector. "Starting tonight, that culture is dead. We are going to restructure this bank from the ground up. Every executive connected to Bradley's shadow network will be purged, their assets frozen, and their files handed over to the federal authorities. We are going to implement the Aegis protocol across the entire corporate mainframe to ensure total impenetrable transparency. We will promote ethical leadership, and we will dominate the market through innovation, not theft." She paused, letting the weight of her visions settle over the room. The board members nodded frantically in agreement, desperate to remain on the winning side of this corporate massacre. "To ensure this transition is handled with absolute legal perfection," Rachel continued, "I am making my first executive appointment." She looked toward the back of the room. Jamal stepped forward from the shadows, leaving his weeping, ruined ex-wife behind in the service corridor. He walked toward the main table, his posture rigid, his face carved from granite. Jamal risked his career and his safety to conduct the internal audit that exposed this rot. Rachel declared, her voice filled with absolute conviction. "He possesses the integrity and the ruthlessness this firm desperately needs." Effective immediately, Jamal is the new chief legal officer of this entire institution. Jamal stopped at Rachel's right hand. He looked down at the board members, his eyes hard and unyielding. The promotion came with a massive equity stake and a salary that guaranteed absolute security. Rachel had not just rewarded his loyalty, she had armed him. With this power and these resources, Jamal could secure the best legal representation on earth. He could easily take full custody of his children, sheltering them in a pristine, fiercely protected life, far away from Claire's toxic manipulation. He bowed his head to Rachel, a silent, profound vow of eternal loyalty. Rachel looked back at the terrified board of directors. She did not smile. She simply raised an eyebrow, projecting the absolute authority of a queen demanding fealty from her court. "I believe a formal vote is required to ratify a new chief executive officer," Rachel said smoothly. The gray-haired former CEO did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He raised his hand high into the air. One by one, every single board member around the massive mahogany table raised their hands in unanimous, desperate agreement. It was done. Rachel had conquered the very institution that her ex-husband had once used to make her feel small. She owned the board, she owned the bank, she owned her future. 6 months had passed since the federal raid at Apex Holdings. The dust had settled, the indictments had been processed, and the scales of justice had finally balanced with ruthless, unrelenting precision. Inside the sprawling concrete perimeter of Allenwood Federal Penitentiary, the harsh fluorescent lights offered absolutely no place to hide. Bradley Vance, former titan of Wall Street and self-proclaimed master of the universe, knelt on the scuffed linoleum of the prison cafeteria. He wore a standard-issue, oversized orange jumpsuit that hung loosely off his diminishing frame. His hands, once used to sign billion-dollar acquisitions and dismiss human lives with a flick of a gold-plated pen, were plunged into a yellow bucket of gray, foul-smelling mop water. He scrubbed the floors with a stiff, bristled brush, his breath coming in ragged, exhausted gasps. A corrections officer barked a sharp command from the doorway, forcing Bradley to move faster. There were no board members to manipulate here. There were no algorithms to steal and no wealth to shield him. He was just another inmate serving a 20-year sentence for federal racketeering, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Every agonizing scrub of the brush against the dirty floor was a crushing reminder of the brilliant, loyal family he had traded for a cinderblock cell. 200 miles away, the blinking defective neon sign of a roadside motel cast a sickly pink glow into a cramped, mildew-scented room. Claire sat on the edge of a sagging mattress wearing a stiff, grease-stained polyester uniform from the local diner where she now worked the graveyard shift. Her hands were raw and blistered from washing industrial pots. Spread across the cheap laminate table in front of her were thick stacks of court-ordered restitution mandates and legal fines she would spend the rest of her life trying to pay off. She had no assets. She had no high society friends. Worst of all, she had no family. Jamal had secured full, impenetrable custody of their children. The deafening silence of the motel room, broken only by the roar of highway traffic outside, was a constant psychological punishment for the toxic web of lies she had so eagerly spun. On the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a cold autumn wind swept down Fifth Avenue. Brittany stood outside the heavy glass doors of an exclusive French bistro, shivering in a cheap off-brand coat. Her bank accounts had been entirely seized by the federal government. Her credit cards were all declined. She watched through the frosted glass as her former high society friends sipped vintage champagne and laughed in the warmth of the restaurant. She raised her hand to wave, desperate for a lifeline, desperate for a single shred of the status she had worshipped above all else. The women inside simply turned their backs, ignoring her completely. She was persona non grata. She was an absolute ghost in the very city she had once thought she ruled. High above those cold streets piercing the Manhattan skyline stood a magnificent triplex penthouse wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. The sprawling multi-million-dollar residence overlooked the vast, vibrant expanse of Central Park. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the soft strains of jazz and the quiet, steady hum of absolute peace. Rachel stepped out onto the sprawling private terrace. She wore a simple, elegant cashmere sweater, a glass of red wine in her hand. The city lights reflected brightly in her eyes, glittering like a sea of diamonds she had rightfully conquered. Leo sat at a sleek glass table near the edge of the terrace. He was no longer the defensive cornered teenager hacking from a cramped, damp basement. He radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence. He tapped the screen of his laptop, finalizing the last digital signatures on a massive, unprecedented fellowship contract with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Top universities around the globe had engaged in a fierce bidding war for his intellect, but he had chosen his path on his own terms. "Sent," Leo announced, closing the laptop with a satisfying click. "The algorithm framework is officially licensed for their advanced robotics division, and I retain 100% of the proprietary rights." Rachel smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that reached all the way to her eyes. "You built the leverage, Leo. Now you own the game." The smooth chime of the private elevator echoed from the foyer. The heavy oak doors slid open, and the sound of bright, genuine laughter instantly filled the penthouse. Jamal walked into the grand living room, holding a bakery box tied with string. His two young children flanked him, their faces glowing with happiness as they immediately ran toward the terrace to see Leo. Jamal looked completely transformed. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to drag down his shoulders was entirely gone. He wore a relaxed, tailored suit, looking every bit the formidable chief legal officer he had become. But his eyes were light and unburdened. He had rebuilt his family unit, shielding his children from the toxicity of their past and surrounding them with an environment of pure, uncompromising support. "We brought dessert," Jamal called out, setting the box on the marble kitchen island. "The kids insisted on the chocolate hazelnut torts." Rachel walked inside to greet him, exchanging a warm, deeply respectful embrace. There was a profound kinship between them, a bond forged in the fires of their respective trials. They had both faced total ruin at the hands of the people they were supposed to trust, and they had both fought their way out of the dark with absolute ruthless integrity to protect the ones they loved. "The timing is perfect," Rachel said, looking over at Leo, who was currently explaining the mechanics of a drone prototype to Jamal's fascinated son. "We were just celebrating. To new beginnings." Jamal smiled, raising an imaginary glass. And to the best board meeting Apex Holdings has ever had today. Profits are up 20%, and the federal monitors have officially cleared our compliance restructuring. We cut out the rot. The bank is entirely clean. Rachel nodded, feeling the immense satisfying weight of total victory. She poured Jamal a glass of wine, leaving him to chat with the children as she stepped back out onto the terrace. She walked to the glass railing, resting her hands against the cool metal. She looked down at the glittering grid of Manhattan. She watched the towering skyscrapers, the rushing traffic, the millions of moving parts of the empire she had successfully navigated and subdued. She thought about the cold, damp basement apartment. She thought about the eviction notices, the terror the nights she had spent wondering how she would feed her son while Bradley drank vintage champagne. She thought about Claire's vicious betrayal and the sheer unadulterated arrogance of the elite who had tried to crush her out of existence. They had taken everything from her. They had stripped her of her dignity, her resources, and her safety. They had pushed her down into the absolute lowest depths, expecting her to simply rot away in the dark. Rachel took a slow, deep breath of the crisp autumn air. A serene, devastatingly powerful smile touched her lips. "They threw us into the dirt because they thought we were a burden," Rachel said quietly to the wind, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a queen who had finally won her crown. "They did not realize we were seeds." The most profound lesson woven through this narrative motif is that your inherent worth is never defined by those who fail to see it. When forced into the role of the family scapegoat, it is incredibly easy to internalize the constant belittlement and believe you are the disappointment they claim you are. However, true power lies in refusing to accept their toxic script. Instead of begging for validation from people committed to misunderstanding you, the ultimate victory is found in silent, unwavering resilience. By stepping away from the chaos and quietly building your own independence, financial stability, and authentic life, you construct an armor they cannot pierce. Success built on your own terms is not just a shield, it is the ultimate equalizer. It proves that family loyalty should never mean tolerating abuse, and that blood ties do not obligate you to accept disrespect. You hold the power to write your own ending, transforming the pain of abandonment and betrayal into the unbreakable foundation of your triumph. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own success? Share your journey and comment below.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every